Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. In this podcast episode, I take a look at one aspect of how Britain commemorates its colonial past, the evidence in which this takes place, and the simple fact that this evidence is not just a statue or a landmark in a major city, but is actually all around us, and we interact with this evidence throughout the course of our daily lives. What am I alluding to? I'm alluding to the fact that there is so much evidence about colonialism on your own doorstep, where you live in your local area. It has become easy to engage in discussions that create a polarised society about colonialism and the evidence that remains of it today. However, I think it's important, if not vital, to understand that a great way to begin your learning journey about not just colonialism but any aspect of the past is to follow a line of inquiry that begins from your own immediate experience, aka from your own doorstep. This episode can also be viewed as a sequel to my previous podcast episode called What Do We Know About Edward Colston, where I explored some perspectives on the life of this man and provided questions for thought and discussion. I also looked at the wider issue on whether statues and landmarks that honour people associated with the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism should be removed or should remain and or be renamed. This debate has recently been extended to looking at revising street names that have associations with Britain's colonial past and whether these also should be renamed and have their negative history erased. Inspired by this debate, I decided to carry out some research on street names in my local area of Watford Town in the UK. I began my inquiry by using Google to look at a present-day map of Watford, and I found 6 roads situated in the same area with colonial associations, and they are Imperial Way, Colonial Way, Federal Way, Clive Way, Rhodes Way, and Salisbury Road. I also found some news articles online from the local Watford Journal that discussed the debate regarding whether Watford Council should or shouldn't rename these roads. The perspective being that these roads should now reflect the cultural diversity of the town. There were also articles about 2 local footballers who argued that these roads should not be renamed. However, at the time of recording this podcast, the names of all of these roads have remained unchanged. We are all familiar with the terms colonial and imperial, but you may not be so familiar with the names Clive, Rhodes and Salisbury. So here's a quick explanation of the origins of these names. Robert Clive, 1725 to 1774, was also known as Clive of India or First Baron Clive of Plassey, and was instrumental in defeating the Bengal ruler and his French allies in the Battle of Plassey in 1757. On becoming the first general of Plassey, Robert Clive established British rule in India through the British East India Company. Cecil John Rhodes, 1853 to 1902, was a mining magnate, politician and British imperialist who annexed vast amounts of land in southern Africa. The ideology of apartheid is often related back to his views of British superiority to the indigenous African population. Zimbabwe was actually renamed Rhodesia after him. Robert Arthur Talbot Gascoigne Cecil, 3rd Marquis of Salisbury, was a British politician during the time of Cecil John Rhodes' activities in southern Africa. And during one of his terms as Prime Minister, 1885 to 6, the capital city of Zimbabwe was renamed Salisbury after him. There are probably other roads in Watford that also have associations with colonialism. However, as this is a whole new area of my learning journey to be developed, I decided to use these roads as a starting point for my inquiry, as they were right on my doorstep. During my half-term break, I decided to take an early morning stroll around my local area. Out of these 6 roads, only one, Salisbury Road, was residential. The other 5 made up an area of land that is currently used as an industrial complex of offices, warehouses and showrooms for building materials, household products and furniture. And my hunch about there possibly being more roads linked to colonialism was also correct. My research uncovered 2 more roads, Pretoria Road and Durban Road. Why were these particular roads given these names? What factors may have led to this decision? What was the significance of this area, if any? Other related questions that came to mind were, who might have owned this land? Did the land on these streets have a different use in the past, and if so, when did the use of the land change to its current use today? To try and find answers to these questions, I began with a simple street check, but this only provided census information from the previous 10 years. So, I visited Watford's Central Library. However, the archives were closed and would remain closed for the foreseeable future, but I was able to obtain some information about the origins of the street names in Watford and listed buildings in the Watford area. I discovered that there were no listed buildings within the area of this industrial complex, but I surmised that there were probably buildings in Watford that did have a connection with colonialism, even if they were not situated on these specific roads. I decided that this could be another line of inquiry for focused research in the future, and the focus for another podcast. So what did I find out about the street names? According to the sources that I used, Imperial Way, Colonial Way, Federal Way, Clive Way and Rhodes Way were a complex of roads that were renamed during the 1940s to early 1960s in celebration of Britain's empire, and possibly coincided with celebrations marking the end of World War II. 1945. We can therefore conclude that the names of Clive and Rhodes relate to this celebration. As for Salisbury Road, this name was indeed inspired by the Prime Minister to celebrate his 3rd term in office, 1896 to 1902. So, should we rename certain streets because they allude to a negative past? The only way to come to possible conclusions is to go on your own learning journey and become less influenced by the emotive issues and more informed by following a line of inquiry in taking some time to study the evidence around you and their origins. The issue is not just simply changing the names, but also what names do we replace them with? Who decides on the new names? What should these names be associated with? And can you simply erase an aspect of the past by simply renaming? In renaming, what other aspects of the past are we erasing too? Street names are often a more integral part of our history, culture and way of life, as where we live and or where we came from and what these are named after often forms a part of our individual and collective identities and life experiences. If street names are changed, are we just doing things right in order to ease some sort of collective political conscience? Or should we be doing the right thing and using street names to learn about and understand our past and being a constant reminder of not only what happened, but that it shouldn't happen again? If we erase the past, then future generations will be at risk of making the mistakes that the past can teach us never to repeat. Historical inquiry is something that we are taught in school throughout our childhood. But do we disregard it as adults? Developing our curiosity is vital to developing our understanding about issues that we see as problematic, particularly in history, because isn't all history problematic? If this is so, then how can or should we solve it? A possible answer could be that it is simply a matter of learning about the past in order to learn from the past, and your starting point should be here, right on your doorstep. If you liked this podcast, then click the subscribe button, stay on this listening platform, and check out my other podcasts related to this episode, such as What Do We Know About Edward Colston that I mentioned earlier, and A Call to Action, Macmillan's Wind of Change speech, and the extended version, Wind of Change Expanded, which are both an analysis of Prime Minister Macmillan's 1960 landmark speech about the end of Britain's empire, all from the very first season. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. These are all available on the website in paperback, on Amazon in Kindle format, and in ebook format at Apple Books and all other digital platforms. Also, the publication of the latest 4 titles. Now, if you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. And if you'd like to sign up to my email list, just visit the website where you can opt in and receive your free samples of my first 4 titles. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes, so don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click on to whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And, as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next